Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Our guest is Major General Retired Robert J. Duke Bodisch, Sr. of the Texas State Guard, who is also the Deputy Director, Chief of Staff for the Texas Department of Public Safety from Homeland Security, retired from that position as well. But first, it's time for updates and announcements. If you have an announcement from a conservative organization that you would like announced on this show, please send the information to tninformer.tv@gmail.com the Friday before the show. For good conservative talk radio, tune in to 105.3 WDXE Radio in Lawrenceburg from 5 to 6 p.m. on Monday for the Kip Capley Show, and Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. for the local GOP radio show hosted by the Chair of the Lawrence County GOP, Brandon Taylor, and the Secretary, Lawrence Sutton. Fridays are free speech news featuring Lawrence Sutton and Chris Morris, the Chair of the Giles County GOP, and an SEC member, also from 5 to 6 p.m. If you want our state to step up and push back on our overreaching, often unconstitutional federal government, visit tncss.weebly.com and learn more about the legislation we hope to get passed this session that creates multiple processes for nullifying unconstitutional federal actions. More on this issue after the new year. Now a little about our guest. In August 2009, Robert Bodisch was appointed Department of Public Safety Chief of Staff and Assistant Director of the Texas Homeland Security, which included, among a number of responsibilities, the Texas Division of Emergency Management and the Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division. In 2014, he was promoted to Deputy Director and maintained his Homeland Security and Chief of Staff responsibilities and assumed several additional service responsibilities. In 2018, Director Bodisch assumed the additional responsibility for the department's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division. Before coming to DPS, Mr. Bodisch was Deputy Director, Governor's Office of Homeland Security from 2007 to August of 2009. Mr. Bodisch started his law enforcement and criminal justice career in 1973. He served as a deputy sheriff with the Harris County Sheriff's Department from 1973 to 1975, lieutenant investigator with the Harris County District Attorney's Office from 1975 to 1984, and was chief investigator with the Texas Prosecutor Council in 1985 and senior criminal investigator with the Texas Attorney General's Office from 1985 to 1989. He served as the director, Governor's Texas Narcotics Control Program from 1996 to 2001. General Bodisch served as the Director of Education and Training for the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement Officer Standards and Education from 2002 to 2005 and Assistant Director of the Office of Special Investigations for the Texas Attorney General's Office in 2006. In 2006, he developed a model policy and procedure for the response to a suicide/homicide bomber, which was adopted by a number of law enforcement agencies in the U.S. and listed on the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance Law Enforcement Assistance website. He served 2 tours of duty in Iraq, 2005 and 2007, working for the Department of Justice, International Criminal Investigative Training Assistance Program. His first tour of duty in Iraq started January 2005, and he was assigned as the manager of the Iraqi Police Executive Leadership Development Team from January to April. From April to June, he served as the Plans and Projects Officer at the Civilian Police Assistance Training Team headquarters. During this period, Director Bodisch also applied his skills and talents instructing and supporting coalition and Iraqi working groups to detect, deter, and defeat improvised explosive devices. The preferred method of insurgent attacks in Iraq at that time. In June, Director Bodisch was assigned as a senior law enforcement advisor to the Ministry of Interior Police Partnership Program, which evolved into the Ministry of Interior Transition Team. As a senior international law enforcement advisor, Director Bodisch directly advised Iraqi Ministry of Interior senior officials responsible for the national level police programs, capabilities, and sustainment. From July to December, Director Bodisch developed and spearheaded an initiative to assess the ability of the Ministries of Interior's ability to develop and sustain police facility protection forces, criminal investigators, and intelligence agencies along the border fences. The assessment team consisted of more than 25 coalition personnel working in 12 functional areas across the ministry with an investment of approximately 8,000 man-hours. The results of this comprehensive assessment were essential to determining the next forces areas in the coalition's missions to develop Iraqi security ministries. Director Bodisch also instructed coalition team members in tactical convoy operations and conducted at least 40 tactical convoys between the international zone and the Ministry of Interior Forward Operating Base Shield and other locations within the red zone without incident. For his service during 2005, Director Bodisch received the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Joint Civilian Service Commendation Medal awarded by Lieutenant General Martin E. Dempsey, Commanding General for MTSCI. Director Bodisch's second tour in Iraq began 24 January 07 as the Assistant Program Manager for the Department of Justice Iraq Police Program. Upon his arrival in Iraq, he assumed the position of Acting Program Manager and held that position until April 24th. Director Bodisch was responsible for 191 DOJ international police trainers assigned to the Civilian Police Assistance Training Team deployed throughout Iraq, at which 15 Iraqi police training centers and colleges included in that count. Director Bodisch also held the position of Director of Training for CPAT and was responsible for all international law enforcement instructors and law enforcement education and training for the Ministry of Interior Police Forces, including the Iraqi Police Service, Border Forces, Facilities Protection Services, Investigative and Intelligence Forces, and the Iraqi National Police. CPAT was a subordinate command under the Multinational Security Transition Command, Iraq, and was commanded by Lieutenant General James Dubik. During 2007, over 15,000 Iraqi police service basic recruits were trained in training centers throughout Iraq. In addition, over 18,000 Iraqi National Police received transition and basic recruit training, and 6,400 police personnel received specialized, advanced, and leadership training. During this period of time, Director Bodisch was responsible for moving all law enforcement instruction from lecture-based to performance-based training and instituted an Iraqi-wide training inspectors program and inspector generals program. He received the U.S. Army Outstanding Civilian Service Medal awarded by Lieutenant General James Dubik. In addition, the Dean of the Baghdad Police College, Iraqi General Jassim Tahir Silab, awarded Director Bodisch an honorary Doctor of Philosophy and International Police Studies degree for his efforts. Director Bodisch has undertaken an extensive study of Islam, Middle East, and the Arab culture for the past 20-plus years and maintains an extensive library and research material with respect to those areas of study. Director Bodisch has an associate and bachelor of science degree in criminal justice from the University of Houston and a master of science degree in quality systems management, a graduate of the Governor's Executive Development Program, the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs Law Enforcement Exchange Program, and the United States Air Force National Security Forum. He was commissioned as a Texas Peace Officer in July of 1973 and currently holds a Master Peace Officer's license and has over 6,800 hours of law enforcement education and training. Upon retirement in August of 2018, after a 45-year law enforcement career, Director Bodisch was commissioned a Special Texas Ranger by the Director of the Department of Public Safety. Quite a resume, sir. You've done a lot, seen a lot. Thank you for being with us tonight, and how are you?
It's an honor. Doing well.
So you've got a lot of various levels of experience in a wide range of things, and I didn't realize you'd been overseas quite that much. That's quite a bit.
Yeah, I had a great time and a great learning experience, and especially when you are trying to understand ideologies, it's always good to step foot on the real ground and see it from the front line.
Yeah. Well, if you were in Iraq during that time, you definitely saw it. Let's go ahead and get right into the questions. I think after October 7th, with what happened in Israel, more Americans became concerned about a similar attack on American soil. From what you know, how likely is that?
Well, I think a lot about that, and because of the current world events and the totally unsecured border that we all know about today, I'm very concerned that we may see terror attacks in the U.S. sooner rather than later. Just 2 weeks ago, the director of the FBI said that he saw flashing red lights everywhere he looked. And at the same time, the leadership of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran and other terrorist organizations are calling for their supporters to launch attacks, specifically in the U.S., the U.K., and other countries that support Israel. So I think we should be expecting that we're going to see some attacks.
I also saw the other day where there was a imam in Michigan who was encouraging his congregation to commit jihad.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
You know, and another important piece of information, that ties back to the unsecured border. It's estimated by the end of 2024, we will have seen 10 million illegal immigrants from 160 countries, including countries of special interest, that will have entered into the U.S., and another 2 million known and unapprehended gotaways. So you have to think about that for just a second. 2 million known and unapprehended gotaways during this current administration. And a known and unapprehended gotaway is generally folks that we see on camera, but Border Patrol or the state police or law enforcement is not able to get to them in order to make apprehension on them. So they got into the country, and where they are today, who knows?
okay, so let me ask you about that. So they see them on camera. Where are they're seeing them right at the border or prior to getting close to the border?
So along the Texas border, we have a camera project that there's about close to 7,000 covert cameras stationed along the high traffic areas. And, it's a big border. So you can't be everywhere at every time. So these cameras help, and they're monitored, and whenever they're triggered, we have folks that notify local law enforcement, say, okay, we got 25, we got 30, we got 50 that just came across, and they're running this way or that way, and they give them as much information as they can see on the cameras, and then pass that on to law enforcement. But oftentimes, you can't be everywhere at one time, and a lot of them do get through.
Wow.
Without being apprehended.
That's a scary number. You said almost 2 million, correct?
Yes.
Wow.
And now the other part of that is the unknown gotaways, the ones that we don't know about that weren't picked up on cameras and they got across and came into the country. That's the ones we know as the unknown gotaways. And that could also be a significant number, but we just have no way of knowing what that number is.
Right. And now I think you said special interest or special
interest countries.
Okay. Yeah. I'm assuming most of those are probably countries known for Islamic terrorists.
Yes. Yeah. So there's 35 designated special interest countries, and of course we're seeing people coming from 160 different countries across the border now, so they're coming from everywhere. Now,
with respect to Hamas, Hezbollah, and some of the other better known or terrorist organizations, what have we seen of them coming across the border? Do we have any kind of idea of those groups in particular?
Yeah, I guess you're talking about the watch listed folks.
Right.
So another important number to be aware of is the reported number of watch listed people who were apprehended at the ports of entry and between the ports of entry. And from October 21 through September 23, there were 1,387 individuals apprehended who were on the terrorist watch list. Now that's both borders, north and south, between the ports of entry and at the ports of entry. Now the difference is at the ports of entry, they came through a port of entry, but between the ports of entry, they were trying to get in the country without being detected and got apprehended.
Okay.
So that's almost 1,400 that were on the terrorist watch list that were identified. There's no way to know how many watch listed individuals aided by the cartels that evaded apprehension and entered into the U.S. or where they currently are located.
Right. Now, and of course, when we're talking about Hamas, I know at one time in our country, the FBI understood that CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, was Hamas. CARE and the Muslim Brotherhood, there's definitely a link there. That's all Hamas. Really, I think all of the groups, pick a group, they all pretty much splinter from the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, and they all started back in the 60s, when Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood formed up the Muslim Students Association and the Students for Justice in Palestine and all those other groups who are all big supporters of Hamas.
Yeah. And several years ago, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Texas where they had the Holy Land Foundation trial that involved terrorist fundraising, the biggest terrorist fundraising trial? And that was towards the end of the Bush administration, and once the Obama administration took over, it was just nothing happened with it, from what I recall.
Well, there were lots of unindicted co-conspirators that probably should have been indicted, but were not.
Right. I think CARE was listed as an unindicted co-conspirator,
yes,
and of course they're everywhere.
Yeah, and of course they appealed the fact that they were an unindicted co-conspirator, but a federal judge upheld that unindicted co-conspirator designation on them. So they still are.
Right. So what should people look out for in regards to possible terrorist or terrorist activity?
Well, that's an interesting question. Because people have asked me that before and said, well, what to look for with respect to a possible terrorist. Well, a terrorist can look like anybody, and it could look like us. I mean, we've seen any number of U.S. citizens convert to Islam and then, try to pull off some sort of terrorist attack and get arrested and indicted by the FBI and go to prison. I think what's important is for people to understand that if you see something that's suspicious or it looks out of the ordinary, out of character, then report it to the police or the FBI and let them check it out, because what you see or what you report could be that one missing piece of information that pulls together a planned attack. And, I tell people that all the time, and they say, well, I don't want to bother the police. They'll think I'm a nut and this kind of stuff. But I tell them again and again, no, you have to report it. If you see something that looks suspicious, out of character, out of different, then you have to report it. So let somebody else, look into it and check it out. And if it's nothing, then it's nothing. But if it turns out to be something, then you did a good deed.
Absolutely, and especially since 9/11 and as many attacks as we've had on U.S. soil since then, it's not something to ignore and blow off. That's for sure. And I think the big shame is that after all of that, people don't recognize that the threat doctrine, that Islam is a threat doctrine. I mean, their whole doctrine is a threat to our way of life. And I know people don't like to hear that because they want to say it's a religion. Well, I'm not worried about who they pray to, but knowing the doctrine of political Islam, people need to understand terrorism is part of that.
Well, and it's totally antithetical to our Constitution.
Absolutely. Now, of course, down there on the border, the Islamists don't control the border. It looks like right now the Mexican cartels do, and they're not exactly nice people either. And I don't know if people really understand how bad the cartels are. You want to enlighten us on that a little bit?
Yeah, let me give you some information on the cartels. The Mexican cartels are as ruthless and depraved as ISIS, Hamas, or any other terrorist organization. They run multi-million-dollar criminal enterprises. They engage in murder, assassinations, kidnappings, torture of every sort, rape, sexual slavery, indentured servitude. And of course, they profit in the drug trade, including fentanyl, which is killing a lot of our citizens today. And the list goes on and on. They're involved in human trafficking, sex trafficking, and the cartels have associates in virtually every major city and employ local gangs to move their illicit products and help them engage in the human smuggling and trafficking business. I can tell you, I've seen videotapes that were while I was on active service at DPS, and I've seen videotapes where some of the most brutal um, uh, activities are exercised by these cartels. One is they take a 55-gallon drum and they fill it three-quarters the way up with acid, and they will take a person that may be from a different cartel that came in on their property or on their plaza, or a policeman or a judge or a prosecutor, and they'll string them up feet first, and they'll slowly lower them into that vat of acid until there's nothing left but bones. I mean, that's as depraved as you can possibly get. I've seen them where they take a scalpel and they go all the way around the neck and they pull the person's face completely off, and then here's the skull, and they're still alive. I mean, some of the most depraved stuff you've ever seen, mass killings, mass graves. I mean, these people are very, very bad. And, people say, well, how come Mexico is so corrupt and how come they're not doing anything? Well, they're scared to death of them, quite honestly. And they're outgunned. I mean, they have better military equipment and armored vehicles and hand grenades, RPGs, machine guns of every type. So they're a formidable force, and there's many of them.
So is the government complicit just out of fear, or is there, I'm sure there's got to be a certain amount of corruption?
Yeah, no, I mean, Mexico, I think everyone knows Mexico has been a corrupt country for decades and decades. I think, though, maybe over the past 20 years, we've really seen it, ramp up. And seems that corruption has reached new levels, including the local, state, federal, military, corporations. They've corrupted the media, non-governmental organizations. We've seen quite a few journalists have been murdered, assassinated, kidnapped, their families kidnapped, assassinated. So you don't hear a lot in the news in Mexico about all the violence and all the things that are taking place. And even on our side of the border, with some of our U.S. journalists, they're very reluctant to, put too much out there about the cartels, fearing for their own safety.
Yeah, especially if they're close to the border.
Let me give you an example. I had several years ago, I talked to a senior Mexican police officer, and he was describing to me, how quickly the corruption happens. And he said, we have a class, let's say, of 100 brand new police officers, and they graduate from the academy. And once they graduate, they go home, and within the next day or two, they get a knock on the door, and it's your local cartel guy with a paper bag. And he says, I know what you get paid. It's between $250 and $450 a month. And so we want you to have this bag to help take care of your family, and and you'll be helping us and working with us. And no, I'm a good policeman. I'm not going to engage in that. And they said, well, tomorrow you will be a dead policeman, and your entire family will be dead. And we know where your parents live, your brother, your cousins, and then the next thing you know, he takes the bag and he's hooked.
Wow.
That's how fast it can happen. I mean, people don't want to die, and that's life in that country.
Now they have a new administration down there in Mexico, and what's their new policy for dealing with this?
Well, that's a great question. President Obrador, when he first came into his office, said that we were not going to use violence against violence. There would be more hugs than bullets.
My God.
And you have to ask yourself, well, how's that working out for you, Mr. President? Because things have gotten even worse than the previous administration with the violence and depravity that's taking place.
Good Lord. You're going to think about using hugs for people that will do what you described a few minutes ago?
Yeah.
That's just insane. You know.
Hugs and not bullets is what he said.
Good Lord. Well.
And what a lot of people don't understand is that Texas shares a 1,254-mile land border with Mexico and a 367-mile coastline along the Gulf of Mexico. And there are fast boats that come in with loads. They can bring a fast boat in with 500 pounds of marijuana or several hundred pounds of cocaine or whatever, they're moving that day, and land on the coastline, and they'll have a crew, ready to pick it up, and they do it in minutes. The boat hits, they unload it, load it up in the vehicle, and they're gone. So, I mean, that's a lot of territory, to secure. And that's part of the big problem is having so much. And then you've got New Mexico, Arizona, and California, which is about another, 1,000 miles between those three states. But by and large, Texas has the largest share, for sure.
Right. Anything?
But, too, without the full resources of the federal government, security's like squeezing Jello. You have to remember the cartels get a vote. So when security is enhanced in one area, the cartels can easily move to another, especially when you have 1,254 miles to move about and little or no interference from Mexican authorities.
Right.
So it would take no help from them at all.
It would take a huge dedication. If our government were willing, and they haven't been willing for years now, I mean, it would take a major effort to secure our border.
Absolutely.
At least in the
context. And I've got some ideas I can go into here in just a few minutes on what we can do.
Okay, great. So the current invasion of our country, it's obviously Fed-led, and it makes us all border states to a great degree. And as a matter of fact, what are some of the things the state of Texas is now doing to try to defend its border, since the federal government not only is not doing its job, but it's actually leading this invasion?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the past several years, Texas has spent literally billions and billions of taxpayer dollars, state tax dollars, not federal, to deploy hundreds and hundreds of state troopers, special agents, and Texas Rangers, along with patrol boats along the Rio Grande River, because the Mexicans don't patrol the river, air assets in the sky, numerous surveillance platforms. Recently, we've been putting the strategic maritime floating barriers in the river, which has been working fairly well. Razor wire on the U.S. bank side of the river, and security fencing and walls, and a host of other security measures. That's just some of the things that we've been doing. Of course, we've deployed the National Guard and our State Guard as well to bolster the state police and the Border Patrol. I mean, Border Patrol is relegated right now to basically just processing people,
right, bringing them in,
rather than enforcing the law.
Right, bringing them in, yeah. So is there any way that other states could help Texas in their attempt to secure the border?
Yes, and fortunately, a number of states have deployed some of their own National Guard troops, as well as some of their state police and local law enforcement officers to assist Texas in their security operations, and that's been a great help. That's not paid for by the federal government either. Those states, individual states that are sending those assets to Texas are paying that out of their own coffers. So as we say in Texas, though, and because of the national security threat posed by an open border, every state is a border state. Absolutely. And every town is a border town. That covers the entire country.
Absolutely. And now, so the states that are sending Guard there, National Guard or their State Guard or They're actually being used to secure. They're not being used to facilitate the border patrol and bringing people over, right?
Right, right. No.
Okay.
They are, and they're in, and you'll understand this, and probably most of your listeners too. They are in state active duty status, not Title 32
Right.
and not Title 10. So they are in a state status, and the governor is their commander in chief, and so he can deploy them or she can deploy them, whatever way they see fit.
Okay. I saw earlier today where Governor Abbott approved for the National Guard and I guess for the police force in Texas to arrest the illegals. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So today, this afternoon, the governor signed Senate Bill 4, which provides law enforcement the ability to arrest upon illegal entry. So someone comes across the river and they step onto the U.S. side and the officer sees them, he can arrest them. And it's a criminal offense to make an illegal entry. And they will provide the arrestee an opportunity to voluntarily return back to Mexico. If not, then they're going to be prosecuted. And then there's a provision, if you're a repeat offender, if you've come over once, been sent back, and you come back again, you can get up to 20 years in prison. So that's pretty substantial, and we think that's going to have a significant impact once that word starts getting out to all the folks that are in Mexico right now thinking that they're going to be coming across. Unfortunately, though, the bill is probably going to be contested in the courts. So some judge will probably stay it until, it's been litigated. But the governor did sign that today, and it's a good bill, and we'll just have to see if the courts are going to agree to allow it to stand.
Yeah, and I'm going to make a comment here, and I don't expect any response or anything, but that's one of those situations where, in my opinion, states, especially in the situation we're in now, they just have to tell the feds, you're not doing your job. Not only are you not doing your job, you're leading this invasion. So we're not going to listen to what you say on this issue. We are going to do what we have to do to keep our people safe. So don't care what you say, feds. These people come across the border, we're going to give them the choice to leave, or we're going to lock them up. And something has to be done. I mean, waiting for the courts and waiting for the federal government to do the right thing, I mean, that's never going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, but the reality is you may get a federal judge that puts the kibosh on it until it can be litigated in the courts. So we'll just have to see what happens.
Right.
It's new ground. It's going to break new ground, and if we're successful in Texas, then I would think that New Mexico, Arizona, and California would want to follow suit, because if we shut them off from coming into Texas, there's only 3 other states for them to go to, and they're all west of us.
Right. Now, let me ask you something. As far as arresting, do you have a place to put those kind of numbers? I mean, I know across the country, most of the prisons are already, fairly full. Do you guys have a place to house all those people?
Right. They've got detention areas. And the thing is most of these folks that come over don't want to be put in detention. So if they're given the opportunity to voluntarily go back to Mexico or go back wherever they're from, they're probably going to take it rather than go into detention.
Right. And of course, they're going to try to get back in again because you've got that big border and it's still basically open.
Therein lies the reason for having that repeat offender section where you can get up to 20 years in prison if you come back.
Good point.
That's gonna get some attention, I believe.
So as far
the governor also signed Senate Bill 3, which adds 1.4 billion towards our border wall. So Texas, in addition to what President Trump did, Texas has constructed 16 miles of border wall with 33 miles under construction and 110 miles of razor wire.
Wow.
That's a lot of razor wire.
That is. That is.
But so the 1.4 billion will assist in doing, keep that going.
So as far as
along with the tactical marine barriers as well.
Right. So as far as other states go, I mean, the best thing they could do is send troops to help secure the border.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's, every state's a border state now. So, I mean, they're helping themselves by doing that.
Yeah. And sending state and local law enforcement officers gives them the opportunity to learn about, what's going on the border and to understand how the cartels impact not only, Texas, but wherever they're from. It could be from Detroit or, Chicago, and they all have a gang problem. Those gangs are probably working with the cartels to move product and smuggling people and all kinds of criminal enterprises. So it's good for them to be able to get that experience and see exactly what goes on in that area.
Right. Another thing that we have a problem with is, despite the problem we have with illegals coming in the country and have had for years now, organizations like the NFIB and Chamber of Commerce are still so pro-illegal labor, at least here in Tennessee. I know in Tennessee, just 2 years ago, our legislature passed a bill that would allow illegal aliens, and granted they were focusing on the DACA kids, that special class of illegal alien created by Obama. It was focused on them, but with the way it's written, it applies to the guys who are coming across the border now. They can actually get professional licenses in Tennessee. Do you guys have some of the same problems in Texas with the NFIB and Chamber there? Are they still so pro-illegal labor that they don't care and they just contribute to the problem?
No, it's interesting because a lot of the Hispanics in Texas are really upset about what's going on the border with all the people coming in, because they look at it that, they're taking their jobs, they're pushing them out. So I don't think it's a bigger problem in Texas as it might be in some other states.
Okay.
I haven't looked into that area in quite some time, though, so I reserve the right to change my opinion after I look into it a little bit more.
Okay.
But hey, I had one other Senate bill that was also signed today. It was also a Senate Bill 4, but from the third special session that took place, and it was a enhancement of the punishment of smuggling. So it's a huge problem, because you'll have 18, 19-year-old kids from Houston drive to the border because they hooked up with somebody on the internet, and they pick up 4 or 5 illegals, and then they start hauling them back to Houston or wherever they're coming from. And so the smuggling is just off the charts. So what they've done now is passed an enhanced punishment. So it's a mandatory 10-year sentence if you're caught smuggling.
Good.
So that's going to get some attention. And I don't think anybody's going to be able to, file a suit on that. That's just an enhancement of our state law, our smuggling statute that's been in place for a long time. There's also a 5-year minimum for conducting a stash house. So if you've got a stash house on the border, which they're all over, and you get caught, then it's a minimum of 5 years. So, elevating those punishments and putting those consequences out there loud and proud, is probably going to have a pretty significant impact.
Absolutely. Let's hope so anyway.
Yeah.
Now, if our federal government were willing to do its job, what federal and state well, what federal policies need to be implemented to secure the border, because even if they were interested in doing it, like you said, it's a huge border.
Yeah.
What would they have to do to secure the border, other than in addition to a wall?
Yeah. Well, prior to the current administration, we had the border security was pretty much under control. But those were mostly policy issues. And so there's a number of policy measures that the administration could implement that would address the immediate crisis that we're experiencing. So, for instance, we need to finish the border wall along all 2,200 miles of border from Texas to California. We need to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy for all asylum seekers. That was very significant. And when the administration did away with that, Mexico said, just come on through, and north is Texas. Third is end the catch and release system. So when you're arrested, you either go to detention or you get deported instead of just being released back into the country.
Right.
We need to resume deportations of all criminal aliens, and we need to resume deportations of those people that have been adjudicated by the courts and their asylum request was denied and they have an order of deportation. I think last time I checked on that number, there was probably a quarter of a million people that were here still under orders of deportation.
Wow.
We need to hire more immigration judges and clear the judicial backlog, right? The word is right now is that if you're here and you've been granted authorization to apply for asylum, it could be 5 to 8 years before your case is heard. So, and most of them do not show up for their hearings anyway.
Right.
So they just go off into the sunset. Also need to re-enter all the agreements with the Northern Triangle partners of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, because they were being helpful under the Trump administration in stopping them at the south part of Mexico and not allowing them to come through. So that would also be helpful. We also need to hire and deploy more federal law enforcement officers and allow them to do their enforcement job and stop all this, processing. And, it's just amazing that the federal government wants more money so they can process more and process faster instead of, enforcing the law, the rule of law, and requiring these folks to come in legally. We also need to ensure that, I don't know if I just lost the thing here. Stand by 1 second, please.
Sure.
Well, we also need to require strict screening and vetting requirements. If you look, and you've probably seen this on the news from time to time, where they'll show trash on our side and there'll be ID cards from everywhere in the world. So they throw away their ID card and then they go turn themselves in and they say, I'm whoever I want to be that day. And then you have no ID to ID them with. And so then you process them under the name they give you and whatever information they give you, and then you allow them in. So we got to make sure that we're requiring strict screening and vetting requirements. And there has to be, and this was one of the things that the Border Patrol representative said today at the press conference, there has to be real consequences for illegal entry and serious punishment for repeat offenders. And on the state side, that bill was signed today, but the federal government needs to step up and do the same thing.
You know, as much money as we spend on our military overseas, NATO and other, and of course in the Middle East, it just disgusts me that we don't secure our own border. We should have, I mean, we have two installations in Texas, and I've never been stationed at either one of them. I'm not sure how close to the border they are. I know, well, Bliss is right there. But then you've got Fort Hood. I'm not sure exactly how close to the border that is. But, you know, that whole 2,000-mile stretch, to me, that's a job for the military. That is something that we should have our military doing to keep us safe, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably what it's going to take, you know, when a new administration comes in, that would have to be the immediate source of assets would be the military until they can get enough people hired and vetted and then deployed to the border to do the enforcement mechanism and to take all these guys that are now doing processing and put them back on the line, right, where they can enforce the law.
Yeah. And I don't know how we're ever going to get all the ones that are already over here out. That's going to probably take years to do that.
That will take probably decades. And you know, that's I've listened to the candidates, you know, that are running for president now, and some of them have some interesting ways of handling things, but you know, I'd really like to hear from all of them. You know, what's the plan? You know, we know we've got all these people that came over illegally. Right. They're claiming asylum, but they don't have a legitimate asylum claim. They're here for economics only, and that's not an asylum claim. So they rightfully should be sent back to their country.
Absolutely. You know, even if, you know, I don't know if we make it till 2025 when we get a new president in there, hopefully the right one who's determined to deal with this. You know, we can't just say, okay, we're shutting it down now, and if you're here, you're good. Those people have to go. We have to find a way to weed them out. And like you said, it'll probably take decades, but that's going to be a huge effort in itself.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And here's something to think about. In 2010, Pew Research estimated that at that time, in 2021, we had 10.5 million illegals in the country. Now, I think that's a far, far conservative number.
I agree.
I think we had a lot more than that. Yeah. But now we see that by the end of 2024, we will have taken in another 10 million.
Yep.
I mean, Texas has 30 million people in the whole state. I mean, that's almost a whole state somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, back up to the terrorist issue just a little bit here. You guys passed some legislation last year or earlier this year, the terrorist offender tracking program in Texas.
Yeah.
Tell us about that a little bit.
We instituted this as an additional security initiative for the state. It might be interesting to note that 35 states and the District of Columbia have state terrorism statutes, and that's a good thing because since 9/11, there have been thousands of people charged, indicted, convicted, and sentenced to mostly federal prisons for providing material support to terror organizations as well as other terror-related offenses. And according to the Center for Security Policy, most terror-related convicts serve an average sentence of only 13 years, and at least 61 individuals with terrorism-related convictions are scheduled to be released from federal prison in 2024. So what was missing was a way to track and monitor these convicted terrorists so that law enforcement would always know their whereabouts and their movements. In Texas, we took the successful Texas Sex Offender Registration Program and developed the Texas Terrorist Offender Registration Program so that law enforcement can keep track of these convicted terrorists once they're released from prison. Now, the registry requires a convicted terrorist convicted after the effective date of the legislation, which is 1 January 2024, who moves or resides in Texas to register for life whether convicted in state or federal court. And a lot of people say, well, what about all the ones that are in prison right now? Why can't they register? Well, because they've already been convicted of their offense, and now you can't go back and heap on another punishment for an offense that took place prior to the legislation being passed. Does that make sense?
Right, right. Is there anything you can do about those people, though?
No, we would hope that, if the federal government, if they're coming out of, federal prison, that probably they have, 5 or 6 or 7 years where they have to be monitored and report in to the parole office or whatever. But that's about it. I mean, so, I would think, that other states would want to have an interest in this new Texas law and may want to adopt the same registry to track convicted terrorists in their own states. Because, let's look what would happen if I'm a convicted terrorist and as I'm being released from prison, they say, okay, there's a law in Texas. If you're going to move back to Texas or go back to your home in Texas, you're going to have to register for life as a terrorist. Well, but New Jersey doesn't have that law.
Right.
Where do you think I'm going?
Yeah. Well, a lot of them come. A lot of them don't go that far north. Tennessee ends up with
true.
more than our fair share of people.
They may want to go to Louisiana or someplace. But,
yeah.
Hopefully they wouldn't go to Tennessee. But I think that's why I think a lot of states have had an interest in this because they see there's utility in law enforcement knowing where these people are, where they go to school, where their car is registered, where their house is, where they work. All those kinds of things will be required, just like under the sex offender registration program.
Well, it sounds like a good law and definitely one that I'm going to share with a couple of legislators I know here in Tennessee. That's something we need to seriously look at doing. I wish we could make it retroactive. But if nothing else, I suppose the feds could, if we can get them to do something. If nothing else, they could if they had something similar on tap, they would be able to at least let us know when they're letting so and so out of jail. I imagine maybe there's some sort of program now that would allow them to notify states when those people are released. I would hope.
Well, we would hope that would be the case, but I would not hold my breath on that one.
Yeah. Or trust the feds to do it. That's for sure. Yeah. Any additional thoughts or comments? Other things you want people to know about what's the chaos on the border?
No, well, it's these are very interesting times. I mean, we've seen some very significant and creative legislation trying to address the security problems at the border, and that's awfully unusual for a state to have to do that. But as we all know, the federal government has completely failed in their responsibility to secure this border. And no matter how many times the DHS secretary says the border is secure, I mean, that's got to be the all-time lie of the century.
Yeah.
Because anybody that comes down there, whether they're Democrats or Republicans or independents, once they come down there and they see what's going on, they say, "Oh my God, what this is crazy."
Yeah.
And we agree with them.
Yeah.
So I just hope that we will see, that our current elected leaders have the courage to address these security issues and address the long-term consequences that, as we already said, that it's going to plague us as a nation for decades to come. And but I hope they do something in 2024, and if not in 2024, then hopefully something will happen in 2025. So,
Hope so.
I hope this information was helpful.
Absolutely.
To better understand the border crisis here in Texas and the whole Southwest border, and how it does impact every single American throughout the country.
I think we had a question from one of our callers. If you could hold just a second.
Sure.
We don't? Okay. All right. Well, hey, I want to thank you for being with us tonight and for all the great information. I'd love to have you back sometime, and I've really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, you didn't bring any good news other than, I guess, the terrorist offender registration. That's probably the
Yeah,
best
I hate to
thing.
be the bearer of bad news, but there wasn't any good news I could come up with except the legislation.
No, there's no good news from the border, and like you say, Mayorkas actually makes Baghdad Bob look credible.
Yeah, no kidding.
But thanks again. Like I say, love to have you back sometime. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to watch our program. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell to stay informed about our upcoming shows. You can now listen to us on podcast at Spreaker.com. You can find all the audio-only podcasts of your favorite episodes on our website, tninformer.com, or do a search for the Tennessee Informer on Spreaker.com, where you can also download the Spreaker app for Android or Apple phones to listen while you're on the go. We're excited to announce the Tennessee Informer podcasts are now available to listen to on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and several other podcast platforms. There are many ways to watch and listen, so stay tuned as we grow and share the message. Also, please take a moment to check out and follow our Facebook page at TN Informer. We'll be posting a lot of news and information on there as well as on our Tennessee Informer site. You can sign up for a weekly newsletter. We are now also on Twitter at tninformer.com. Please share with us with your friends so they can stay up to date on all the things that are going on in Tennessee. There will be no show on Christmas or New Year's Day, but we will return on our new night for the show. The new night in 2024 will be Tuesdays, every Tuesday, the same start time, 7 to 8 Central, and our first show will be January the 2nd. Our guest will be Robert Brown, constitutional scholar and educator on the topic of nullification. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.